So, okay. So anyway, um, no doubt this is an ongoing challenge to biblical authority and whether people take our faith seriously. Um, I have dealt with this, of course, so many times on college campuses. I couldn't even begin to tell you how many conversations I've had about this. But anyway, just even more, even a few most recently. But anyway, so this is a good topic and it's important. Um, there have been a slew of books written about it, more and more coming out all the time. Um, I don't know how much people on the call have had that much experience with it, or how much you've researched it, or how many people you're dealing with in your personal life that deal with this issue. Sometimes Christians have family members that have issues with it. I know that parents can have that issue with kids and of course other family members. So there's plenty of resources out there if you just want to go deeper. There's some of the books, just some of the books there. Um, Way more than that even. So, you can certainly read and read and read and build your knowledge base up if you haven't taken the time to do it. They're all good resources. Probably a few of the people that have been just want to mention a few of the people who have been on the front lines of this topic for a long time, that have written about it, debated it, been in the public square, taken a lot of heat, sometimes lost jobs, status, popularity. Robert Gagnon is certainly one of them, one big biblical scholars. He's like the guy that wrote the book, The Bible and Homosexual Practice. He wrote this a long time ago. I think it's been updated, but if you go to his website, he's got all kinds of articles on there. He's done so many debates on it. Um, he has other books too, but he's been on the front lines for a long time. A lot of New Testament professors have used his texts in their classes. He's not. This is wrong. He's no longer at New Testament Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. He's not there anymore. I forgot to mention that. I don't even know where he's at now. I have to look. He's at a different school. He's moved around because schools that start to go the bend more in this area begin to become more liberal in this area, that he makes them uncomfortable. So they just kick him out. They basically just get rid of him. He goes to another school. Anyway, and especially if Christian seminaries are getting state funding, or I mean federal funding or something, they're going to have to cater to to that issue. So it's kind of sad, but it has happened. So check out his stuff. You also can check out Christopher Yuan. I have had him on for a Zoom call. It's on my YouTube channel. I interviewed him. He is a former practicing gay man. Um, Very strong ministry now towards the gay community. He's got a great book called Holy Sexuality and the Gospel. If you go to his website, he's just got so much material on there. He's got a lot of videos. He does a lot of talks, a lot of sermons. You can look him up online. Great guy. Um, Really, really committed to what he's doing, the ministry he's committed to. So he's doing great work, but he's on the front lines, taking a lot of heat, of course, a lot of persecution, a lot of pushback. But he was a former drug addict, practicing gay man, and then he came to faith. It's been transformed, and he talks about it. Rosaria Butterfield's another one, former practicing lesbian. She's out there in the public square a lot. She used to be a professor as well. Wrote a book called Five Lies of Anti-Christian Age, but she's certainly been on the front lines as well, still is. Um, she takes a lot of heat as well, but she certainly lived the lesbian lifestyle and knows all about it. Um, but anyway, she's another one. So, anyway, if you want to go deeper, look up some of these people and start reading away, watch some of their talks, get informed. Okay. Um, there's no lack of material out there. That's for sure. There's plenty of materials out there. Okay. Sometimes, there's no doubt that Christians can make mistakes when we approach this topic. Um, there's no doubt that sometimes we assume the people we're talking to about it accept the Bible as an authority, and sometimes we quote Bible verses at them, and that can be a mistake. Sometimes we just don't have the wisdom and discernment on how to navigate the discussion. Sometimes we just don't have the experience. Uh, we just may not don't really know anybody and haven't gone through talked about it with people before. Maybe we just debated it more with people already that aren't even really struggling with being gay. You know what I mean? Maybe they're just like other Christians debating other Christians about it. Sometimes we just don't want to talk about the issue. It's too delicate, too controversial, so we just punt out of it, which doesn't help anybody. And of course, like I said, sometimes we just need to get more educated about the topic. And we have, like I said, we haven't maybe personally encountered anyone firsthand that struggles with the issue. I have a cousin, my first cousin, who does struggle with the issue, has been openly gay for a long time, also professes to be a believer too. That's a whole other topic. But anyway, so I have dealt with this issue on a personal level with my first cousin, and of course, many college students. Of course, I had friends too. I've had friends too, but that have had this issue. But anyway, so when people, like I said last week, when people start judging God or holding God to a standard above himself, like I said last week, when they criticize the Bible or criticize God for judging in the Old Testament, once again, they're holding God to a standard that's above him. I don't know where that standard comes from. I don't know whatever you're judging God and saying he's wrong. I'm trying to figure out what standard you're using. Is it your personal standard? Is it society standard? Is it just your personal opinion? Is there some standard that God's accountable to? If so, where does it come from? I'd like to know, because I want to know what's the authority behind that standard. Okay. So good luck in trying to find one that some sort of objective standard that is above God. I'd like you to show me what it is. If it's your standard, that's not a standard that is above God. That's your personal opinion. That's not an objective standard. Okay. That's your subjective preference. Okay. So let me know when you find one. Okay. Um, there's no doubt that there's been a lot of confusion in our culture between tolerance and acceptance. In today's climate, we know that tolerance can be viewed as accepting any behavior is okay. And if you don't accept a certain behavior, you're not being tolerant. We know that's been going around for a long time. So if you criticize something and say it's wrong, you pass judgment, you're viewed as intolerant. So if you say a certain behavior is morally wrong, you're intolerant. But I think we all know that all humans do not accept all behaviors. We don't live that way. If someone cuts you off on the freeway and causes you to be in an accident, you're not going to accept that behavior, right? Someone breaks into your house and starts to threaten your family, you're not going to accept that behavior. I could go down the list of all the behaviors you don't accept. So many people assume that tolerance means to accept every behavior. That's not what true tolerance is. Tolerance means to love people even if you don't agree about a certain behavior. It means I can tolerate a person, I can accept you, but it doesn't mean I accept the behavior. So we can always tell people, as far as sexuality, that we certainly don't have anything against them as a person, but we certainly doesn't mean we have to accept the behavior. Jesus doesn't accept all behaviors. God doesn't accept all behaviors. And as Christians, we don't accept behaviors of each other. There's things about me, certain behaviors, my family doesn't like at times if I leave the knife with peanut butter on it on the counter by accident, which I don't do anymore, but maybe I got distracted or whatever it is. You go on and on. There's certain behaviors you just don't accept. Okay. So the goal is to speak the truth in love always. Speak both truth and love together. If you just speak truth, all truth, and you're not loving, your tone and the way you come across is going to be not going to be very inviting by the person. Then if you just love them and don't mention the truth, you're not helping them because the truth is what sets them free. Okay. You can just, someone says, we just need to love people. We just need to love them, love them. Well, you can love them, but love isn't going to set them free. It's them believing the truth and acting on the truth that sets them free. Okay. So, when people sometimes, have that phrase, love wins, they're assuming that all Jesus is love and God is just love. So they've kind of divorced the truth they issue out of their character, right? But we know that Jesus spoke the truth in love. We know God is both a God of truth and love. And so we don't do anybody any favors, like I said, by falling into this trap. Okay, because that basically just says that love wins, basically affirm all behaviors, is what that means. Just affirm all behaviors and you're being loving. Now, obviously, when we start to use the Bible on this topic, and most Christians assume the Bible is God's word, it's authoritative and inspired. Most people never Christians have never even looked into why they believe that. I've talked about that on this call many times. These calls, I've done more than enough Zoom calls on the Bible. But when we start with the Bible with people and we start quoting passages, we make assumptions about the people we're talking to. Okay. And sometimes we assume ahead of time that the individual obviously believes in God, and we assume the person accepts the Bible as authoritative. It's like an authority in their life. And we don't know if they do. I mean, if you start quoting the Bible with them, I mean, they may look at it like it's irrelevant to them. I mean, best thing to do is ask them what they believe about God and what they believe about the Bible before you start using the Bible with them. Okay. As the famous quote from The Lord of the Rings, if you may remember that movie, it's the greatest trilogy made of all time. My three favorite movies, Lord of the Rings, those three movies they made. But Boromir has this quote. He says, "One does not simply walk into Mordor." Well, we could say, as he says it, he says, "One does not simply walk into Mordor." And then he goes on a long rant about why Mordor is an evil place. So, we could say that, one does not simply quote the Bible to someone who doesn't accept it as an authority. So you have to be very discerning about that. So when someone says to me, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality, I don't really know why they care. If they don't accept the Bible as an authority and they don't accept Jesus as an authority, I don't know why they even bring that up. So I always respond back with, well, is the Bible an authority to you and is Jesus an authority to you? If they say, well, no, and I'm like, well, why do you care what he said or didn't say? I mean, it's irrelevant. Now, I also will say to them, or maybe you really do care. That's why you brought it up. Maybe you do deep in your conscience, you do care what about Jesus thinks about your sexuality. So if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. Okay. Sometimes you just have to probe a little further. Um, Now, when we get in this topic of defining what gay means, it's not just as simple as saying, well, you know, guys like guys, girls like girls. You have to give better definitions because it encompasses these three areas. So sometimes we talk about same-sex attraction, same-sex orientation, and same-sex behavior. Most people sometimes just think of same-sex behavior, like people who are committing physical acts between each other, right? Same-sex physical actions, right? But it's more than that. Um, excuse me. Somebody, we know that people sometimes use the word when they say I'm gay in a strong sense. They're referring to that as their core identity, is central to who they are. Okay. Now, I don't really, if I say I'm heterosexual, that's not really First of all, I don't use say that much because it's not my core identity. I mean, yeah, I'm heterosexual, but it doesn't play such a huge role in my identity. Whereas with gay people, a lot of times it becomes part of their core identity. It's very important to them. We could say, in a soft sense, it refers to how they experience the world. So, I experience the world as being a heterosexual man. It's the way I experience the world. I mean, it's the way I see reality. I know there's people don't are not heterosexual, but overall, it's the way I experience the world around me. But for a gay person, that's the way they experience the world around them. But when you think of your core identity, people that get caught up in their sexuality as a core identity is a problem because in life you have different identities. I mean, you have like, I could say I'm a husband, father, writer, apologist, missionary, teacher, runner, tennis player, eats sushi eater, whatever. These little identities, but they're not my primary or core identity. I mean, your primary identity as a Christian is you're an image bearer of God and you're a follower of Jesus, right? That's your ultimate identity or core identity. Okay, but a lot of times with the gay topic, they get way caught up as their primary or core identity is in their sexuality, and that becomes a problem. So that's why you're always talking to somebody, you always should try to bring that into the conversation, issues of identity. Okay. Now, it says in the APA, American Psychological Association, it says same-sex attraction refers to an enduring pattern of emotional, romantic, or sexual attractions of someone of the same sex and includes other non-sexual relational bonds such as affection between partners, shared goals, values, mutual support, and ongoing commitment. Such attractions are not chosen or created by the person. They are simply felt. That's how they define same-sex orientation. Or same should be really same-sex attraction. I'm sorry, I have those mislabeled. It should be same-sex attraction. Um, you could say that same-sex orientation is related to same-sex attraction. Okay, because your orientation is like your disposition, whether or not you're acting on it. So if I say that I have an opposite sex attraction, I'm heterosexual, means that my orientation is towards women. That describes my sexual orientation. Okay, so that doesn't cease for me. I never cease to be heterosexual. That's just my orientation. Okay, same thing with the gay thing. Their orientation is towards the same sex. Sometimes same-sex orientation is synonymous with same-sex attraction. But same-sex attraction can sometimes be like a fixed attraction. Um, and sometimes someone may say, I'm same-sex attracted, but I don't act on it. I just am physically attracted to the same sex, but I don't act on it, don't have physical interactions with anybody on it. But then when you get into same-sex behavior, that's where you're obviously that's where you're pursuing somebody with not only an attraction but the sense you want to act on it. Okay. Um, I mean, some same-sex couples could say, we live with each other, but we don't do any of the physical stuff, right? That's what they sometimes say, but most of them will not say that, but some of them might. Okay. Now, um, so, what do you do if you're a local pastor, and someone comes into the congregation who struggles with saying, yeah, I have same-sex attraction problems, and sometimes I struggle with same-sex behavior, sometimes I act on it, or I just struggle with same-sex attraction. I'm attracted to the same sex, but I don't act on it. If I'm pastoring, I would say, sure, you're welcome here, but we welcome all people. I mean, there's other kinds of people in the congregation that have sexual addictions and anger problems and all kinds of other addictions. But the reality of it is that if you come, we want you to come as you are, but we don't want you to stay as you are. And so if I was a pastor and someone said to me, well, I want you to affirm my sexuality, I want you to affirm my same-sex relationship. Can I go to this church and be loved and accepted, but maintain that sexual relationship with somebody? Can I live with them and maintain a same-sex relationship? I would say no. Say no, you can't ask me to affirm that as a pastor. As a church, we're not going to affirm it. We're not going to affirm that behavior. But if you want to come here and experience God's transformation and want to work on sanctification, which is what the church is, it's really the role of sanctification, then you're welcome to come here. But you need to come here with the idea that the goal is repentance and transformation. So, if they don't like it, well, I'm leaving. So, okay, well, you leave. I don't know. That's the way it goes. We're not there to accommodate that kind of thing. I mean, we don't answer to them anyway. We answer to God. So that's the way I would handle it. But if they say, yeah, I struggle with it, but I know God wants to transform me in this area and I will go to your church. I want help. I want to, really work hard on this and I want to be trained. I'll be, yeah, you're welcome to come, obviously. So, it said, like it says in First Corinthians 5, 9 to 13, when, Paul says, I wrote you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. In no way did I mean the immoral people of this world, the greedy and swindlers and idolaters, and then you'd have to go out of the world. But now I'm willing to write to you to associate. I'm writing to you not to associate with anyone who calls himself a Christian is sexually immoral, greedy, or adulterer, verbally abusive, drunkard, or swindler. Do not even eat with such a person. What do I have to do with judging those on the outside? Aren't you not to judge those on the inside? For God will judge those on the outside. So we need to remember that when we say um, homosexuality is sin, or we say that the gay the gay issue is sin in God's eyes, we're allowed to say that from a biblical perspective. Yes, God judges it in His Word. He says in His Word it is sin, but ultimately God will be the judge of that person. Um, we don't expect to. We're not the ultimate judge of them. We can still say it's morally wrong. Someone comes to me and says, "What do you think of homosexuality?" I'm like, "I think it's a sin biblically. I mean, but ultimately God's your judge. He'll judge you for the behavior, not me." So, but if you ask me what I think of it, I'll tell you what I think of it. I'm not going to be like, well, I don't want to judge, because that's God's job to judge. No, you can say it's morally wrong. Okay. You don't need to apologize. I don't want to say anything, it's just, I don't, it's God's job to judge. Yes, He will judge the behavior, but you can tell them biblically what it says. Their arguments with the word of God. It's not with you, it's with the Bible. And if they don't think the Bible's an authority, then who cares? Why should they care what God thinks if they don't consider the Bible as an authority? Okay. But we are called to judge those, certainly, to discipline and rebuke and judge on the inside. Like if someone's in your congregation, they're living that lifestyle, you're certainly permitted to, deal with it. No problem. But on the outside the church, you can morally say it's wrong, but you're going to let just God's the one who's going to deal with it. That's not a local church on the outside. You're not dealing with believers. Okay. All right. Um, Now, what about the issue of people that struggle with lust, like same-sex lust, just like heterosexuals or guys or girls that struggle with lust towards the opposite sex. We struggle with lustful sexual desires towards somebody of the opposite sex. What about the gay person who has that problem? Is that sin, or is it just the actions? When they actually act on it. Okay. Well, we know that temptation has at least a couple defining elements. There's a trial there, which is the temptation. It's like an enticement it's a trial and an enticement to sin, right? And so the testing that comes um, is a certainly can be a trial. That's what it is, trial or testing. I mean, we're being tested. Um, but the enticement that enters our minds, we're enticed, right? And so when if you look at the kind of temptation in the Bible, the temptation that came to like Jesus when he's in the wilderness, um, that came from the outside. That was Satan tempting him from the outside, right? It didn't start within the nature of Jesus. Jesus doesn't have a sinful nature anyway, so he can't start to have sinful thoughts or sinful desires. He can't. We can. Okay. Our temptation can come from the inside. It's where the enticement comes from our own sinful desires. Okay. Because of our sinful nature, our flesh starts to conjure, starts to mix and or starts to get turned around, and we start having those you know those those wicked desires, right? And so in that case, that temptation, like if you start lusting after somebody, you know what I mean, and you start thinking in your mind and everything, Jesus calls that adultery, right? Even though you haven't acted on it. So it's really no different for a gay person. He just when they're lusting after someone of the same sex and having sexual thoughts on their minds, they're sinning too. So it's no different. Okay, so technically you can both sin the same way. Heterosexuals do it. Jesus talked about that. Talked about adultery of the heart. And he warned about lusting and things like that. So it's like Denny Burke says in his article, "Is Temptation Sin?" He's a scholar that's written on the homosexuality topic. He says, "Sexual desire that fixates on the same sex is sinful, and that is why God's judgment rightly falls on both desires and actions. Therefore, same-sex behavior and same-sex orientation are both sinful." Some people would say, no, no, they need to act on it. But, what's the difference between heterosexuals that have lustful sexual thoughts in their minds and commit adultery in their minds, right? Like Jesus talked about. It's not much different. Um, Look what Jesus said in Matthew 5. Like I said, you heard that I said to you, you shall not commit adultery. But I say, everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery in his heart. Then he goes on to some strong hyperbole. He says, if your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out, throw it from you. It's better for you to lose one of the parts of your body and your whole body thrown into hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it away from you. It's better for you to lose one part of the parts of your body for your whole body to be going to hell. So it's no different with the same sex issue. Okay. And then Paul says in Romans 1:26 to 27, he talks about God turns them over to their degrading passions. Okay. You notice he says passions. Okay. So then he talks about the women exchanging natural function for what is unnatural, and then men doing the same thing. And so it starts with a desire, right? Sinful desires. Now, some people say that what determines somebody, you know, having same-sex attraction or being gay has to do with nature and nurture. Some people says that there's like a gay gene, it's fixed at birth, you can't help it. And other people say that, well, no, it has to do with nurture, it has to do with the environment you're raised in, family upbringing, life circumstances, could be from an abusive parent, could be from, all kinds of things dealing with life circumstances. Okay. So, both of these things can play a role. Um, but obviously, I'll talk about the issue of nature in a minute. Nurture certainly does play a role in people's. When I've seen people that have gone into the section of the same-sex life, that does play a role. Their environment, circumstances, family experiences can play a role for sure. Yes, I know it's still sin. I'm just saying that those things play a role. And remember that. somebody, even if they come to faith and they have a, they are truly converted, still can struggle with that sin after they come to know the Lord. Just like all of us may have had certain behaviors they struggle with for a long time, right? And that takes a certain amount of time for those to be sanctified and transformed. So, yes, that can happen. Okay. Now, some people say, of course, that people are born gay. It's genetic. There's nothing you can do about it. It's not a choice. It's just something they're born with. So this is what we call an appeal to emotion. And this is where you try to manipulate people based on emotions to win an argument. It's not based on facts or evidence. It's based on emotions and feelings. You're playing on their emotions, saying, well, sometimes people say, well, two people are in love with each other and just want to be happy. What's wrong with that? Leave them alone. I mean, they just want to live a peaceful life and they're not doing anything wrong. They just want to be happy and they love each other. So what gives? That's an appeal to emotion. That's trying to manipulate your emotions to cave in, but it's not relying on any facts or evidence. Okay. Um, the APA has a couple comments about same-sex orientation. Um, the APA defines sexual orientation as enduring pattern of emotional, romantic, or sexual attractions with men, women, or both sexes. When describing where the attraction comes from, the APA is honest that although much research examined the possible genetic, hormonal, developmental, social, cultural influences on sexual orientation, no findings have emerged to permit scientists to conclude the sexual orientation determined by any particular factor or factors. There was an article that came out in 2019 by Harvard and MIT scientists. They said there's no gay gene. Ben Neal, an associate professor in the analytic and translational genetics unit at Massachusetts General Hospital, said there is no single gay gene, and a genetic test for if you're going to have a same-sex relationship is not going to work. It's effectively impossible to predict an individual's sexual behavior from their genes. Okay. So there's a really good video by Dr. Christopher Yuan, I mentioned at the beginning, called Is Being Gay Genetic? I'm sorry, I should say Is Being Gay Genetic? That's a really, really good video. You can watch it online. Just type that in YouTube, Is Being Gay Genetic by Dr. Christopher Yuan. But he says, even if the studies were conclusive, at most it would show a predisposition, not inevitability. We know that people have predispositions to alcoholism, drugs, all kinds of behaviors. It really doesn't solve the ethical question. And just because somebody has a particular disposition or certain desire, it seems like it's a very fixed desire, strong desire even. It doesn't mean that we have to act on it. It doesn't mean we're obligated to act on it. You guys know if you acted on all the desires you had, you destroy your life. Okay. So we don't always act on strong desires. Okay. If you did, you wouldn't make it far in life. Now it's true that I mean, some of us, we may not be able to like pinpoint or look back and say, hey, I know when I had those opposite sex desires. I just know when they kicked in, what grade it was or how young you were. I mean, I don't, most of us can't remember. Like, did you in the third grade walk around and say, hey, I'm attracted to girls as a guy, I'm saying, or as a girl saying, I'm attracted to guys? We didn't really, I don't know, many of us can pinpoint that. Maybe you can say ever since I was a little kid. That's fine, whatever. Anyway, um, we're just saying that it's not necessarily to say those that struggle with same-sex attraction woke up one day and decided to feel the way they feel. Um, it's sometimes these desires were not, I mean, we can say biblically it's just part of the fall of man. It's part of the fallout from the fall of the garden that we have desires that are not set in the right direction. We all have sinful desires. Um, that's always been a case, right? But I'm saying the scientific community, they don't really agree upon, why these desires emerge in like a small subset of the population. But I mean, we know biblically why they do, but sometimes it's debated in science. Now, some people, may say, well, what do you expect someone who is struggling with same-sex attraction to do? To live a celibate life? Let's say you come to a Christian who, or somebody that is a single person who struggles with same-sex attraction, and they just don't, or not, just anybody in general, I should say. But let's say they then get converted. Um, and let's say they still struggle with same-sex attraction. Okay, and they just don't have any attraction towards the opposite sex. I mean, God can certainly transform them, but let's say in some cases it just doesn't happen. I mean, they just are like, I don't know, I just don't, it just doesn't seem to be happening. But I don't want to sin against God, so I have to live a life of celibacy. Um, they might say, well, single heterosexuals have the right of have the hope of getting married, but what about, those of us that struggle, with same-sex attraction? We can't get married now, but there's an outlet for this the heterosexuals and not for us. Well, there's a guy named Wesley Hill. He's a biblical scholar. He's actually what we call a gay celibate Christian, where he practices celibacy. Um, and there's a bit of debate going on whether, you could still have gay friendships, but still live a celibate life. He's part of that debate. And that's been ongoing for a while because he doesn't plan on getting married, but he knows that he doesn't want to live um, in gay activity because it's sin. But anyway, um, the thing we need to remember is that for both heterosexuals and non-heterosexuals, um, no relationship is about sex anyway, just about sex. It's a small part of a marriage. Okay. And yeah, sure, in our culture, it's idolized. We know that. It's idolized in the church at times. Okay. But we know that, Jesus said following him and taking up your cross and following him daily. And we know that means self-denial. We know that Christianity is not easy. And so, for people that struggle, who are struggling with same-sex attraction, feeling they're just stuck and they can't have a relationship, and it's hard, just same thing goes for heterosexuals that are in the church, that are single, who have to live a life of celibacy and they're trying to be pure. It's all the same. Everybody has to, taking up their cross and following Jesus, they all have to do the same thing. So the gay person doesn't get a like a free pass. Okay, it's the same thing all across the board. It's not always easy, and it's a life of self-denial, and it's costly. And that's what Jesus talked about. In the Bible, it's not always easy to follow him. That's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer talked about in his book, The Cost of Discipleship. He said, cheap grace is grace without discipleship. Costly grace is the gospel, which must be sought again and again, the gift which must be asked for the door at which a man must knock. It's costly because it costs a man his life, and it's grace because it gives a man the only true life. And of course, there's people that have been transformed through the gospel. A lot of times you run into people. I've run into a couple Christians on campus, or people that came out of it and said, yeah, God transformed my life. I allowed him to change me. And then some people will say, no, you can't change. It's who you are, and they can't be transformed. But that is not true. But there's a lot of stories online. If you go to the story changed, or the website changed, so changemovement.com. But anyway, so it's just that the person wants to at least be open to it. Some people, they may say, I know people are happy being gay. That's not really that important. because happiness isn't really the ultimate test for truth. Um, Ultimately, we know that God is more concerned with holiness than happiness. I mean, they go together. If you strive to be holy, then you will be happy. And we know that you may be happy, but we know there's physical ramifications for practicing that lifestyle. As it says in the Journal of American Medical Association, the risk of anal cancer increases 4,000% among those engaged in anal intercourse. Just one fallout. So, you know, saying just feeling happy isn't always the a test for truth. Now, let me mention some biblical issues. There's no doubt that there's been there's sometimes what we call revisionist readings, and this is where sometimes people come along and try to take biblical passages and revise them, or else say, well, Paul didn't mean this and this didn't mean that, and they try to come up with different interpretations. There's a guy named Matthew Vines. He's not a scholar, but he wrote a book called God and the Gay Christian. He basically tried to take the passages that most Christians use and tried to say, no, it doesn't mean this or that. He's not a scholar. He just wrote what other scholars said. And then there was a response to Matthew Vines by a lot of biblical scholars saying he was wrong. Um, but he's one of those guys that's been out there trying to get the church to accept homosexuality as normative. Um, when we talk about what we call neo-traditionalists or standard traditionalists, that's what we might say. There's what we call neo-traditionalists, or what we call they embrace the Bible as being authoritative and infirm what we might consider the historical understanding of scriptural teaching about homosexual behavior, which is a sin. But they differ on, they say same-sex attraction is fine. And I talked before about, I think that's biblically, same-sex attraction is still sin too. I think biblically you could say it's sin. But standard traditionalism condemns both same-sex attraction and behavior. Now, let's mention something about Jesus. Some people might say Jesus never said anything outwardly. He didn't say homosexuality is a sin. He didn't give a big lecture on it. Remember, Jesus didn't read the New Testament. There wasn't a New Testament at the time of Jesus. Neither did any of the apostles, right? But Jesus was a Second Temple Jew, and so were his followers. And we know that they were raised on the Torah. They're raised on the Old Testament scriptures. And every Jew um, who wrote on the subject 500 years before and after Jesus all condemned same-sex relations. Okay, there was no debate that it was sin. Okay, so Jesus didn't come along and start a new religion called Christianity, which basically changed the entire view of Jews for 500 years before he came and 500 years after. That's just nonsense. Okay, it was same-sex practice was condemned, like I said, by the ancient Jewish world and in the Torah. Jews knew the issues with it. Jesus didn't need to have a Bible study to review it. Okay. They knew the Leviticus passage in Leviticus 18. They knew about the abominations there. They knew all about it. About the issue of homosexuality. So they weren't ignorant. Um, God, basically all those sins as described in Leviticus, abominations, included all sexual sin. Okay, included incest, bestiality, homosexual practice, adultery, sacrificing children to Moloch. The Jews knew, like I said last week, they're familiar with the Canaanites. The Canaanites practiced those things. God condemned it. And so, no, we don't believe today people need to be put to death. And for Christians to misuse that text would be stupid. So don't say that. But the point is that it's a very serious sin in the Old Testament. We know Jesus said in Matthew 19, marriage is between a man and a woman. I mean, he said, in the beginning, God created male and female. So he did confirm the creation mandate or the creation story of Genesis in Matthew 19. We know Jesus mentioned that. We also know, and Jesus says in Matthew 15, that when he says, out of the heart, or out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. He says, out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. Those are what defile a man. Jesus is condemning all sexual immorality there. It's not just like one kind of sexual immorality, it's all sexual immorality. So outside of biblical marriage and sexual marriage, sex in the context of marriage, Jesus condemns all of it there. Okay. Um, so, you could say, well, Jesus didn't say the word homosexuality, but when he says sexual immorality, it means sexual immoralities, is what it means, really, plural. Okay. Um, I also encourage you to, if you get a chance, to read Robert Gagnon's article. He has an article called Same Sex Practice is Just Like Any Other Sin. A lot of Christians will say that. It's no different than any other sin. He says that's not true. He says that sexual sin in the Bible is way more serious than other sins. You can read his article there. Just type in same sex practice like any other sin. I encourage you to read it. Okay, so let me mention Romans 1. First thing I always encourage people to read Romans 1 to 3 as a unit. Try to read the whole thing together if you can. We know that when you read Romans 1, when you get down to verse 18 to 32, Paul begins to deal with the fact that people reject creation. We know that they suppress the truth. We know that they turn to the creation, they start worshiping the creation. And we know that in Romans 2, it talks about the divine law that they failed to live up to. And I'm talking about the moral law they fail to live up to. Then it talks about the written law, the Torah, they fail up to live to. So both Jews and Gentiles are under sin and they need the gospel. But when you come to Romans 1, Paul is looking back at the Genesis account. He borrows heavily from Genesis. And we know that, I'm using this from Robert Gagnon's chart, since he's allowed it to be used, kind of him. But he's referring back to Genesis, the creation account. And so when Paul condemns it in Romans 1, he definitely is saying that the order of things is based on Genesis. And obviously, these people are going in the opposite direction as the way God created male and female. And then it leads to idolatry. And then God judges the idolatry and they're handed over. Some people say Paul is just focused on pederasty. That's it's not really as serious, but that's not true. Um, it's the opposite. So yeah. Okay. Also, this passage is used a lot, the First Corinthians 6 passage, 9-11 says, do you not know the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, or men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. Such are some of you. Now, if we use that with somebody, if you're going to use that passage with somebody, you might want to mention that this is about somebody that is living an unrepentant life in these areas, right? It's a lifestyle. Okay, it's not somebody who does it one time or commits one sin, and they're like condemned. It's a pattern of behavior. Okay. But you also may want to mention to them, look what Paul goes on to say. He says, but such were some of you. You always want to tell them there's good news that after this, they can be washed, they can be sanctified, they can be justified in the name of Jesus. So tell them the good news at the end of that chapter or those verses. Don't just mention the first part that they're damned and condemned without telling them the last part, saying that, look, these people, this is the time in Corinth, these are the sins they're committing. God says they're under, they're definitely under condemnation, but there's a way out. And the way out is through Jesus, right? That's what we want to appeal to people, that they can be transformed and redeemed, right? Some Christians just quote the first part. They don't quote the last part. Okay. Um, Paul talks about in 1 Timothy 8:11. We know that that is mentioned there in 1 Timothy. So I just want to mention that Paul does mention it there, what the purpose of the law is for. Now, if you look at, there's some correlations between 1 Corinthians 5-6 and Leviticus. Okay, they're related to each other when Paul lays out the sins there. Okay, so most likely Paul is looking at Leviticus, and he's talking about the parallels there. So you may want to check that out sometimes in Leviticus 18, as far as the sins in Leviticus 18 and what Paul's saying in 1 Corinthians 5-6, sexual sins. But what do you do if someone doesn't accept the authority of the Bible? As I mentioned, where do you start with somebody if they don't accept the Bible? They're like, I don't care what the Bible says about it. Um, the the church has always had an option to use natural law arguments. I don't know if you're familiar with natural law, but this is a way of appealing to things that have been revealed in the natural world. Just they're in the fabric of nature without, you don't have to open the Bible to know it. Okay. And when we do that, when we look at the natural world, we know that when we look at male and female, we know based on the natural way our bodies are, they're made for reproduction. Okay. In all species, reproduction requires two distinct body plans, right? One that produces sperm, the other produces an egg. It's the way reproduction has always happened. You don't need the Bible to tell you that. Okay. It's just clear as day in the natural world. Okay. Observing the natural world around you. And so the way that our bodies are sexually designed points to the natural purpose or end goal. Okay. Our bodies have a goal, sexually speaking, for intercourse and for reproduction, for procreation. Okay. There's a design to them that is clear. We don't need the Bible to even tell us that. And so procreation is certainly inherently heterosexual, right? Um, Now, some people may say that, well, some people get married and they don't have kids, or some people can't have kids. Um, and maybe there's circumstances that don't allow procreation. That doesn't really have anything to do with the argument, okay? The human body, the way the natural world has revealed it, still has the capacity for procreation the way it's designed. Just because, if I have a bookshelf and, well, let me give an illustration here. If I have a ice cream machine and it just sits there and it never performs its function, maybe say never gets used, you still know the function of that ice cream machine is to make ice cream. Let's say it's broken. Okay. The machine is still, the purpose of that machine was to make ice cream. Okay. Even if it doesn't get utilized, even if it's broken, it has a certain goal, it has a certain function. Okay. Um, and so just because a couple doesn't have children doesn't mean that um, the the capacity wasn't there. They were still born with the right equipment, and just because it doesn't work right doesn't mean that the capacity, the goal is still not is like gone. Procreate, it doesn't mean procreation is just like not the end goal. Okay. So nature has a specific revelation about sex, whether or not you're able to fulfill that purpose. Okay. If you sniff a glue stick all day long, that's not the purpose of that glue stick, right? You're not using it for its correct purpose. Okay. If you want to use a toaster as a door jamb, that's not the specific purpose or function of that toaster, right? And so when you're talking to people, we know that when they use their bodies, not for the purpose they were intended to be used for, which has been revealed in the natural world, which is heterosexual procreation, and they try to do something with their bodies that they weren't intended to use them for, there's consequences. Okay. We know that there's various health risks of gay intercourse. I have some stats here. It's from this book here, which I can send you the PDF, Cameron Hodges' book. But it says the CDC analysis revealed the new rate of new HIV diagnosis among men who have sex with men is more than 44 times that of other men, is also more than 40 times that of women. The CDC also found that the rate of primary and secondary syphilis among men who have sex with men is more than 46 times than that of other men and more than 71 times that of women. The CDC also reported receptive anal sex is 18 times riskier for HIV acquisition than receptive vaginal sex. Furthermore, in 2012, 75% of reported syphilis cases were among gay and bisexual men, a group which makes up only 2% of the population. The network also reported that those who had sex with men are increased risk for anal cancer compared to the general population. There's other things, but the point is that when we don't use what our bodies are intended for, nature eventually backfires. Okay, reality has a way of fighting back. Same thing can go for heterosexual couples that sleep with multiple partners, of course, and you don't use the body the way it was intended. There's diseases there, of course, and things like that. So it can cut that way too. But the point is that your body was intended, has a specific use, like a function. You can see it in the natural world. Two men can't make a child and two women cannot make a child. Never will happen. Okay. Um, Now, one common argument I just want to mention, we're almost done here. Of course, I'm on a campus, so I hear this a lot. I know you guys think like, what in the world? Some people say, that we observe homosexuality in animals. So the argument goes, if you observe homosexual behavior in animals, then humans should be morally permitted to do it as well. And the second premise is we observe homosexual behavior in animals there, and the conclusion is therefore humans should be morally permitted to engage in homosexual behavior. Um, Rosie O'Donnell, she says in every animal kingdom, in every species, 10% of that population is homosexual, and that's a fact of nature. So the way the argument goes is that since animals engage in homosexual behavior that is instinctual, it must be natural for them. Therefore, it should be natural for humans because we're animals too. Okay. So you can see from the starting point, the get-go, it's an assumption that the evolutionary story is absolutely true, that we're nothing but a higher form of an animal. So that's going to take a lot of work to show that being accurate. Okay, there's a lot of resources out there to debate that humans are just a higher form of an animal. So it is true that there have been some scientific studies that document, you see animals obviously mounting each other in heat. Sometimes males will dominate males before the female is in heat. And then when the female is in heat, the male gets off the male and jumps on the female. Um, that does happen. It's a dominant, it's like an instinct of dominance. Okay, that does happen sometimes. Um, so sometimes these behaviors, are social functions that they have. But it is mostly driven by instinct and environmental factors. Nothing that really parallels, it's not like a loving relationship or anything where It's like, hey, I love you, I mean, it's nothing to do with that. Um, but sometimes, with animals, they get confused and they release something called pheromones that trigger an instinctual behavior. And so it releases something in males that it's almost like it releases like it's just something that it's almost like overwhelming. It's like this instinct to go dominate or something. Um, so that is in the animal kingdom. They can get confused and jump on anything. Okay. Um, but the problem is that trying to take your cues, your moral sexual behaviors from the animal kingdom has problems. Okay. I mean, we know that animals do all kinds of behaviors that we don't emulate. There's a lot of cannibalism. We know the animals eat their own. We know that parents will eat their kids in the animal kingdom. They'll eat their own children or eat their own, and they'll eat their own feces and vomit. They'll eat, they urinate on themselves. I mean, they do all kinds of things that are not emulated by humans and that we don't think is normative behavior among humans. So just to say because animals do this, we should do that, we should be permitted to do this. You look at all the behaviors animals do that we don't follow. Why is it? It seems to be the gay one that we seem to be the most interested in. Secondly, animals aren't created in the image of God. We are, humans are. And animals are not rational beings. They don't have the capacity to choose good and evil. They rely on their instincts. Okay. We are humans. We're creating the image of God. We are the pinnacle of God's creation. We have free moral choices. We have rationality. We don't just go by our instincts. Okay. We're more than animals. Okay. We're different from the animal kingdom. We won't be judged, and we will be judged one day. Animals won't. Okay. So to say that we are just nothing but animals and we should act like animals assumes they're not creating the image and likeness of God and assumes that we're not different from animals, but that begs the question. Now you've got to explain to me how you know that. Okay. Thirdly, um, like I said, our morality is based on higher reasoning and we have ethics and values. Okay. Most animals don't have like an ethical system they're aware of. They just act on instinct alone. It's about survival of the fittest, as you know. For them, it's just about surviving. Um, so we don't to say we just base our morality the way animals have morality is just is stupid. I don't know why. It's just ridiculous. So that's about it, folks. I covered a lot of ground, and there's a lot to research, a lot to study. The best thing to do if you run into people who struggle with this is to form relationships with them, listen to them, but you have to know what you believe and why you believe it, and you have to be willing to speak the truth in love. And remember, a lot of people are rejecting our sexual ethic because they don't think God is good. They can't trust God. You have to try to talk them about why God is good and why he knows what's best for them and why his design for them makes sense. Okay. A lot of times they think God is restricting them, he's holding them back, and he can't be trusted. But once again, it's because they have a wrong or incorrect view of God, right? And who he is and his character. So you have to sometimes bring that up. Um, like I told you one time, I said to students, if Christianity is true, would you be a Christian? And she said, no, because I don't like the sexuality in the Bible. I'm a bisexual. I have a boyfriend and a girlfriend. So some people just want to do what they want to do. And, it's an issue of there's moral issues involved. Okay. But anyway, of course, this topic has evolved into the trans topic. The trans topic is certainly a huge issue as well, but this issue isn't going away. All right. So that's about it, my friends, and we will stop there.